Now that we've seen some of the things that we can do with constraints in auto layout, let's talk about some more specific cases. First, let's start with the project we worked on last time and turn it into a tab view controller really quick so that we can add another scene, just in case you want to be able to keep all of these examples in one place to reference later. To do this, first we want to take our existing project, and in Storyboard we want to select our view controller and embed it in a tab bar controller. If it didn't do it automatically, be sure to make it the initial view controller. We'll just move this one up to make space for our next view controller and give it a name really quick so that we can identify and switch back and forth between the two when we run the simulator. Now let's add our new view controller. To connect it, Control click and drag from the tab bar controller to the new view controller. This way it knows that it exists. And we'll give it a name at the bottom. Let's run it. Alright, great. Looks like our tab bar controller is working. Now, let's get started and add a scroll view. Now the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to add 4 constraints to each of the edges. And I want to uncheck the margins just because I prefer to think about it in terms of going up to the very edges of the screen and not worrying about the automatic margin sizes that auto layout defaults to. Great. And hopefully you've still got your preview window open as well so that you can see it updating live on the side. Now I'm going to give it a light orange background color just so that we'll be able to definitely see it when we run it in our simulator. I'm going to go ahead and minimize the document outlines for these other two since we won't be touching them now. You know what, I'm actually going to change these to be 10 away from the sides. That way we can see very clearly that our scroll view is staying within the screen and not going off the edges at all. Perfect. Looks like we got just what we wanted. Now here you can see that we're getting that same yellow arrow that we see before when we have misplaced views. Now something I didn't show you last time is that when you're in here, you can click on the little symbol and it gives you some options for how to correct this issue. As you can see, the options that we have are very similar to what we would see if we were using that third menu down in the main view. Now, the next thing we want to do is add a view inside of our scroll view. So just like we did before, we want to make sure that we label it nicely in our document outline so that once we add constraints, they'll have nicer names that are easier to read so that we know what's doing what. So what we want to do first with this content view is tell it to have spacing of 0 on each side. Instead of telling our content view to match the size of the scroll view, what this is doing is telling our scroll view to exactly match the size of our content view. We still have some auto layout issues. Scrollable content size ambiguity. Right now, we've told the scroll view and the content view that they should both be the same size, but neither one of them knows what size they should actually be, which is why we're getting these ambiguity warnings. The way to fix this is that we'll add a few more constraints, but this time, instead of telling the content view to size itself relative to the scroll view, which we already know won't work, we bypass the scroll view and we can create constraints between our content view and the root view. To do this, since our content view and our scroll view are pretty close to the edges inside of Storyboard, we'll go ahead and do it directly in the document outline with the control, click, drag that we're used to. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key so that I can make multiple selections at the same time. I'm going to give it equal widths and equal heights. So this is where we tell our content view that it should be the same size as the screen. Let's go ahead and run it. Great. We can see my content view, which is the darker orange, and you can see the light orange peeking out from behind anytime I scroll to the edge, and we get these nice built-in scrolling bounces. You may also notice that right now it's scrolling both left and right as well as up and down. So we're seeing this horizontal scrolling because our content view is about 20 pixels wider than our scroll view, because that's the size of the margins that we gave our scroll view. So let's go over here and remove that horizontal scrolling by making sure that the size of our content is offset by 20 to match the fact that the scroll view is inset by 10 points on each side. Now, if we run it again, we see that we no longer have our horizontal scrolling, but we do still have our vertical scrolling. And we'll update our frames. You know, I kind of don't like that our scroll view is going a little bit into where the status bar would be. So I'm going to increase the top spacing to move it down a little bit. So while we are using a scroll view, it doesn't really make sense for it to scroll when there isn't any content. So we want to make sure that we do a similar offset in the vertical direction so that the content view window exactly matches the size that the scroll view window will be. So we want to take a look at our current position on the screen and pay attention to the margins on the top and the bottom so that we can adjust our constraints appropriately. So as we can see, we've got a margin of 20 on the top and 59 on the bottom, because remember, we got that tab bar down there. So let's go over to the constraint for the height of our content view and update it with this constant so that we get the size that we need. Now, depending on what you have as the first item and the second item, you may need to use -79. Great, our scrolling is gone. Now let's add some stuff to our content view. First, I want to start with a label just so that you can see that it's still possible to center things inside of a scroll view that may have different sizes at runtime. And of course, it's really easy. We're just going to add our horizontal and vertical center and container constraints. And we'll update our frames. Great, so we can already see in our preview that our label is centering itself nicely, and let's run it just to be sure. Fantastic. And you can see that it still works when we rotate our simulator as well, using those command left and right arrows. But this isn't very exciting. So let's also add a few more labels indicating the top and bottom of our scroll view. Since this one already has the color that we want, which is white, let's just duplicate it. To do this, hold down Option and then click and drag from the thing that you want to make a copy of. And we've got these nice guidelines showing us that we're still centered on the other label. And we'll just update the values and add some constraints to the top and bottom of our content view. I'm also going to tidy up our outline view here just so that the order of our labels makes sense. And again, we want them to be centered, so let's add that. And now I'm just going to use the shortcut to update frames, which is Command Option =. Now, what is our scroll view actually going to contain? How about some images? So let's drag an image view onto our content view. Now you can assign an image at runtime in code if you like, but we can also add an image directly inside of Storyboard. But first, to do that, we're going to need to drop in an asset. So let's show the sidebar here. And I'm just going to drag in this photo that I made for a friend. Great. Once it's in your project, we can close that sidebar again. And now in the Attributes Inspector, you should be able to click on that drop-down and select the image that we just added. It's a little bit squashed, but we'll fix that shortly. To do that, we want to make sure that we've selected Aspect Fit. Great. Now, we can still see the outline of the image view that's larger than our image right now. So we're just going to drag it until it lines up with the actual size of our image. There we go. Now we can move it back to the center here. Now we want to add in our constraints for the left, right, and top edges. And I'm also going to add this aspect ratio just so that it really does maintain the proportions that are correct for this image. But since the aspect ratio only works if the image knows what either its height or its size is, we need to go ahead and give it one of those values. So I'm going to tell it to use its current height. And then we'll just add those constraints. Now you can see that right away we're getting conflicts because it's trying to both maintain the current size of the image as well as respect the leading and trailing margins that we told it we wanted. So since my intention was that the photo would actually be as large as possible without getting too close to the edges, we want to make sure that we select our height constraint and set it to greater than or equal. This way we have a guaranteed minimum size, but it will get as big as it needs to fill up that space to the edges. And you can see here, it updates in preview and our conflicting constraint arrow goes away. So let's run it and check it out. Sweet. So we've got our dog here, but our scroll view is still not scrolling. And that makes sense because there's nothing that it needs to scroll to see. Everything already fits on the screen. You may have noticed in the simulator and in the preview on the side is that our image was actually on top of our labels. But I want to make sure that we can still see our labels since I added them to give us a good sense of where the current center of our scroll view is. So I'm just going to rearrange it in the document view. And remember, the higher up it is, the sort of farther away it is from you on the screen. So now I'm going to do that Option, click, and drag again to duplicate our image view. And this is nice because you'll see that it maintains some of the properties of the original, such as the photo that we assigned to it. Now let's be sure to add some additional info to the labels here so that we can tell them apart in our constraints. So I'm just going to add top, mid, and bot so that I know which image I'm referencing. And again, I'm going to drag them so that they are behind the labels. There we go. Now we can see the word center right across the dog's face. And if we open up the constraints, we can see that when we copied the images, it also copied a few of their constraints. So we can see that it kept our aspect ratio as well as the height. And let's add our vertical spacing between our images now. So similar to what we did before, let's make sure that our bottom two photos stay centered on our top photo and that they're equal widths. After that, we just need to add our vertical constraints. And you can see the preview on the side is updating nicely to show us that our constraints look to be doing what we want. Now I'm just going to update these vertical constraints and set them each to 25. Let's go ahead and run it. So I can see that the images appear to be where they should be, but I can't actually scroll. So what's going on here? So remember, we told the content view that it should be the same size as the screen with an offset of 79 to account for the margins. But what we need to do instead is give it a lower priority so that it will become taller when it needs to be. So let's try it again. Still not working. So what other step did I forget? That's right. I didn't give a constraint from our last image to the bottom of the content view. So right now, the content view has no need to grow any bigger. But let's add that and correct our mistake. And it looks like we've got it. So let's run it one last time and see if we finally finished our scroll view. All right, got some nice scrolling action. And as you can see, the labels for top, center, and bottom expand out relative to the size of our content view. And it still works nicely again when we rotate into landscape view. So that's it for this scroll view and auto layout tutorial. I hope that you learned something new and that it helps you in your next project. Thanks for watching.